They asked me to talk about transitioning to no-till. And I've helped farmers do this. We continue to help farmers do this. And again, it's going to go back to what I do in North Dakota may or may not work for you in Ohio. Okay? Hopefully, there's some things that you can pick up from this and use. The first question I get from growers when I'm in my neighborhood is this. Why? What I'm doing is working. Can't argue with that. Actually, they're farming, they're planting their crop, they're harvesting their crop, they're making money. Most of them are. What they're doing is working. I do hope that we've gone beyond some of the days of our history. This is from the Library of Congress, Texas in the 1930s. It's pretty scary. I hope I never see that. Wait a minute. That's a color photo. That's Judd, North Dakota, 2015. That's a 4-wire fence, folks. And I don't know if you know how big a 4-wire fence is, but a 4-wire fence is this tall. That's the top wire. There are places out there where I can find a fence on top of a fence if I dig a big enough hole. Now, I talked this morning, I'm in a country where it's 50% no-till in this area. That's that same field. Okay, so they're right next to that fence there. You can see the old residue, and that is soybean residue, so it's not stupid deep there. But it's at least 3 to 4 inches deep. Anybody want to plant your corn into 4 inches of sand, loose sand with no organic matter? Because that's really what it was, right? The clay particles and the silt particles are in the Atlantic Ocean. They're gone. This is sand. Oh, it's more than sand. It's actually lamb's quarters, pigweed, kochia, water hemp. I'm not joking. Organic matter, he calls it. So this went out 200 yards across the field. This went out. There's really not a whole lot of fertility in that soil. There's no structure whatsoever. And my grower here is a no-till grower, and it was the guy on the neighbor's side that did this to him. Now, I know drifting dicamba on soybean is a bad thing, but it doesn't last for 10 years. This is May 2017. The blue sign is 50 yards away. Both sides of the road are no-till soybeans, have been no-till for 15 years. No-till is actually not enough. We had no cover. The other thing that I didn't tell you about North Dakota is that our crop rotation in corn and soybeans tends to be corn, soybean, 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 corn. That's pretty common. Third year of soybean, how much residue's left? First year of soybean, how much residue's left? Okay. So there's actually good soil structure in those fields. But at 36 mile an hour winds, that ain't enough. Oh, by the way, that's pretty common. The average wind speed in North Dakota is 12 miles an hour. That's why I laugh at the labels. They say, well, you want to spray less than 10 miles an hour. Ha ha. There's like 6 hours of that. We're farming the C layer in this one. That is a 700 Arctic. That's a full-size four-wheeler. It's not a toy. There's over 2 feet of soil missing. These are my whys, folks. Do you have some of them? Maybe not the wind, but I think I saw that one yesterday on the way up here from Columbus. This one you can park my F-250 in, around the corner. I thought about putting the four-wheeler in there, but you saw the other picture of the four-wheeler buried deep. Kind of thought twice about it after that. I was like, too much. Especially with those ridges like that. Now, I showed you the soil that's white with salts. And I'm showing you the snow that's brown or black with dirt. That's a problem. Do you guys get snurred around here? Yeah. You know what it is. Did you know that North Dakota State and Minnesota have both tested the snert off of these for phosphorus, potassium, and nitrogen? it's higher than the field by 2 to 5 times. Where's your phosphorus? You guys know this. What's it attached to? Soil particles. In no-till, where are you applying your phosphorus? Surface of the soil. What's the ones that blow off first? Hello. Now this one isn't no-till. You can see it's black next to it, so it's been tilled, but it's been tilled fairly shallow. And this is a conservation tillage situation. He said, get over here. Okay. This is my salts. Again, I'm going to show you a couple more pictures. This is me proving to my farmers that tillage makes salts worse. You go through it. This is a little tillage machine I built for my ATV just to show them. It's been parked for 10 years because I don't like tillage. Every time I did a pass, it doubled the salts, even though it buried them and they didn't look quite as white. So we did 3 passes on this, and we ended up with almost 3 times as many salts at the end. Well, so it wasn't every time doubled it, but 3 times as many salts at the surface of the soil. Because the salts are in the water, and tillage causes the water to evaporate, and the water leaves and the salts stay behind. That picture you've seen. That picture you've seen. I put them in here knowing that some of you would see them the second time. So my question for folks is tillage helping you farm? Because it does do things. It can kill some weeds. Now, I've met some weed scientists who will say that there's no weed resistant to tillage, and I'll call that wrong. I can name 2 right off the top of my head. Maybe you don't have them, but they're spread by below ground growth. Quackgrass and Canada thistle. Johnson grass too, yeah. Rhizomatous growth will do it. Dandelions, I'm going to say, are pretty resistant to tillage as well. So my question for people that tillage is helping you is how? What is the tillage doing for you? And what I'm going to say is that it is doing things for these folks. In my neighborhood, it is reducing the moisture. It is causing evaporation. It's drying fields out. That it does. Okay? It is also helping us warm up. I told you we plant in very cold soils. If you dry the soil out and you make it black, it's going to warm up faster. We know this. I know this. Okay? So those are 2 things that it does for those growers that are doing tillage in my neighborhood. My question for them is, can you substitute another practice so that you don't have the negatives of the tillage? Because really what you're talking about is water management. This is in Ontario, Canada. I was talking with the agronomist. This field had been long-term hay and grass for many years, I think close to 12 years. The year before, they took it out of the hay and the grass. They decided to use tillage to kill the perennial grass. And they worked it with a deep ripper, a disc ripper, 12 inches, and they came back with a field finisher at 2 inches. See the compaction layer? Yowza. When we pulled this up, the corn roots were only growing in the cracks where the soil had cracked. There was no corn roots growing in between there. He was shocked when I told him how much tillage they did, how deep they did it. Because he didn't tell me, I told him. And I'm from 1,000 miles away. I said, you disc ripped this and you came back with a field finisher. He goes, how did you know that? I said, because your corn looks terrible. He did have a shovel, but he hadn't used it in a long time. We went and grabbed that shovel and we put it in the crack of the soil because I could not get it in the ground. We flipped it up, almost broke the shovel, and I brought up a disc this size, that deep. And he had these hatchet roots going on in there. And he had these little dinky corn cobs. I said, well, how do you expect your corn to grow with no roots? So this happens and people don't even realize it. They had to get the field smoothed out because it was too rough. It had gopher mounds and it had all kinds of problems out there. I understand that's a problem. I understand that a sprayer running at 16 miles an hour, gopher mounds suck. I get that. That's a problem. Now, what we've had happen with some of our growers is we've done the same thing taking CRP out. We've used herbicides to terminate the grass. And we used the disc set in the yard or on the concrete on the road at that depth. That's as deep as it would go, right at that level. So when it came in there, it just tops all the gopher mounds in the hills. And just cuts them one way, and you turn around and you cut them the other way. And it kind of mellows them out. We've saved most of the no-till benefit that we get from soil structure. And we take and smooth that field out. And we do it once the first time and we're done. It's a little rough the first year. Second year, she's pretty smooth. Third year, I'll take that over any gravel road in my county. So you're going to start on no-till or you're going to move into no-till. And what I'm going to call a no-till is continuous no-till. If you're no-tilling 2 years out of 3 and then you go and work it, that's not necessarily the same benefits. I like that you're doing less tillage. That's good for your bottom line. That's good for your soils. That's good for your crops. But you are resetting the system. Okay? You can build aggregates in a short period of time. Our experiences on our higher clay soils, we can build unstable aggregates in 1 to 2 years. In our sandier soils, it takes 3 years. But we can build aggregates in almost any soil. It's just how strong they are structurally. The clay ones are way stronger structurally, and they take more abuse. So, first thing I tell people is residue management. That is the very beginning. We're also going to talk about water management, equipment, weeds, and fertility. Let's talk about residue management. This is where residue management starts. Now, I don't know the size of your equipment. I've seen some of the sizes of your fields. I understand it might be a little bit smaller. That's a 45-foot Macdon head on the front of that combine. And when you look at this from the sky, you see those strips. That is a significant problem in no-till. That is probably the biggest first stumbling block when people start doing no-till, is they didn't manage their residue. So what has happened here is that most of his residue is in about 25-foot swaths, and there's 10 feet or more where there is no residue. Now the drill is not going to line up with this because the drill is 60 feet. So he's going to continuously go across these situations of too much residue, not enough residue, too much residue, not enough residue, too much residue, not enough residue. How do you set the depth? Anybody know? Because I'd like to find out. How do you set the depth to do this? Every time you turn around, it's under different discs. This is a problem. So the first thing I tell growers is get your residue back to where it came from, or leave it where it was to begin with. What do you mean leave it where it was? Stripper header. Talking about a stripper header in small grains. All it does is take the tops of the grain off and it leaves the standing residue, and that's it. And I do have a picture of that too. Leave your corn residue standing in our territory. That may be counterintuitive to folks, but for us it's better for water management and it works better. Now, my corn residue will end up underneath a snowbank most years, and if it's laying flat, it traps the moisture, it covers that up, and it doesn't dry out. And that residue is wet when you come back with your planter and doesn't cut. If it's been standing, it's dry, it's brittle, you run over it, it breaks. It works better. And it doesn't trap the moisture on the surface of the soil. So this combine adjustment is the first thing. And I don't know of a combine on the market, even with their souped up yeehaw spreaders, directional things in the wind, that'll get her back to 45 feet. I showed you my wind speeds. The wind's always blowing. So there's always a problem with this. So what do I tell guys? I tell guys get a smaller header. They love it when I tell them that. But that's the truth. If this is going to hold you up from protecting your soil from the pictures I showed you before, get a smaller header. Get another combine because it's worth it. Okay? Your soil is worth it. I don't know what you pay per acre here, but I'm sure it doesn't take long to add up. This is the stripper header. We learned something when the guy got the stripper header. So that's the tracks that he's using for the combine. Okay? That's standing wheat residue. And the stripper header just rips the tops off. That's it. Works in all small grains. It's worked for us in flax. We tried it on field peas, but I talked about my field peas are this far off the ground, so we really can't even get them in the stripper header. I'd like a vacuum header for those guys. They don't make that yet. But anyway, in this situation, we're leaving the residue, so nothing goes through the combine. His combine efficiency went up. His header's smaller, but he's actually driving faster, moving faster through the field. He's putting way less material through this, and he's leaving the residue stand. And in places where we need snow catch, This works phenomenal. In places where we don't want extra water from the snow, we put CRI in there to manage the water. This is a systems approach. Now his drill works great because that's all standing residue. It's dry next spring. It all cuts and breaks. No problems. Okay? This is a grower I work with. About 40% of my growers are no-till, cover crop type of thing. So the majority of them are not. They used to be. And I am kind of a no-till cover crop guru. I came all the way to Ohio to talk about it. I will say in my general area with no-till and cover crops and that systems approach, it's about 15 to 20%. So I'm still pretty happy about that 40%. And I'm working on these guys, understanding that it takes time. There's risk involved. There's learning involved. The reason I brought a yo-yo down here was to show you about the learning and the tools and the techniques, and you have to do it. I'm helping these farmers learn how to do this. This is a farmer who's from Minnesota who has grandpa's land in North Dakota. I help him manage it. In Minnesota, he does hardcore tillage on 60% clay all the time. He could totally do no-till back home, but I can't convince him of that. I did convince him that he can do no-till here. So, anybody ever study soils and water movement? When you have different textures, the first texture fills up before the water moves down. So my boots sunk in to the depth of the tillage. That happens all the time. That's how water moves in soils. It's called unsaturated flow. This is his other field, kitty corner crossway from the roads. I went from one corner to the other, 50 feet. This is the other field. This is third year no-till. Still too much water. But I like my boots. Third year. I think it's going to take him a little bit longer because he doesn't have real high clay soils here. The aggregates don't form as quickly. And we haven't even put cover crops in this system. So it can be done. I'm hoping for the light bulb to come on for him. He took a shot. He's like, I don't know about this whole thing. This is really risky. What if I can't get it planted? I got to come down and get everything planted within a week, and then I got to go back home, and this is expensive. What if it costs me money? The whole thing. So he's done one field. That's a win for me. That's a huge win. And I'll keep taking those wins, and I'm going to support this grower. But I'm not going to stand there and lecture and tell him that's the only way to do it. As you heard me talk about today, I don't believe in one right way to do anything. The other thing that we have with tillage is crusting. That's nastiness. Crusting is horrible. It's a degradation of your aggregates. You destroy your aggregates. Whenever the water falls, you have this mass, and then when the sun shines and the wind blows, it dries in these masses and it cracks as it shrinks away from itself. It's that simple. Those things are at least as big as my hand, and I can palm a basketball. How do you expect barley, wheat, cereal rye to lift that? How do you expect corn to lift that? How do you expect soybeans to lift that? They can't do it. My next tip for you on equipment and maintenance. Make sure when you go to no-till, you got brand new sharp discs that are full size. Full size. If they've worn a quarter or half an inch, and this is the first time you've done this, you've lost the majority of your cutting surface. Did you know that in several places, 2 medium pizzas are less pizza than 1 large? Square inches? The surface area around that is huge. So when you lose a little bit of edge on your disc, you've lost a lot of surface area. You've lost of your cutting edge, and if it's not sharp, you're going to have issues with that residue, and residue is the number one problem I see for folks in my area when converting to no-till. They're not managing it. And I don't mean by digging it or cutting it. Leaving it where it came from, spreading it back out, and then cutting it with your equipment. Down pressure. So there's a lot of talk about down pressure, and down pressure and compaction are very important. I showed you earlier a picture of corn with sidewall compaction. That's a problem. It was stupid wet when that was planted. That's where the sidewall compaction came from. It wasn't necessarily the down pressure. If you're planting in the right moisture, you're fine. Most of the guys that are doing tillage in my area are running down pressure around 100, 150 pounds. Most of the guys doing no-till are running 300 to 400 pounds down pressure. There's enough structure over time to support that. And they're putting enough pressure so that they keep constant ground contact, they get the right seed depth, and they get cutting pressure. If you're going to do that, you'll probably need to add weight to your planter or your drill, because you're going to push up more than it weighs. I don't care what method you have, speed kills. These high-speed planters, this whole running fast down the field, moving as fast as you can, but it's actually more critical in no-till because you get more variability. As your soil types change, the density of those changes, your residue changes, that changes. So these things change. You didn't work at 4 inches consistent and have a consistent flowery puff across the way. So guys that are doing 5.5 mile an hour planter, in North Dakota, I can bust you. At 5 miles an hour, I can say you were going too fast planting. Because we've got just enough rocks that planter will do a jump. He'll hit it. And I see a shallow seed, a deep seed, and a shallow seed as she bounces. Every time. Now, when you go down to 4 miles per hour, you're 20% less speed. That's a big deal. You hit that same rock, one shallow, one almost right depth, third one's fine. I can't bust you at 4 miles an hour. It looks fine. I can't see it in the stand. 5, I can bust you. 6, you're going to get rough stand counts right out of the gate. So speed kills. All right, these are the aggregates I'm talking about. This is what soil should look like. You don't believe me? Dig up the grass, dig up the trees, I don't care. Dig up anything in where plants have been growing. This is what soil should look like. It should not look like flour at all, ever, because that's what blows away. These are little Lego blocks, I call them. The building blocks. Anybody ever step on a Lego? That hurts. These are my Lego blocks. These are what hold you up. And you put them together in the right combination, you get somewhere. That's a loam. There's a silty clay, and you can see how wet that is. There's moisture on my hand. And I dropped that silty clay, and I did not have a whole lot of mud on my hand. That's 50% clay in the Red River Valley. You should be able to grab your soil and not have really dirty hands. This is a sandy loam. You can build aggregates everywhere. The trick in a sandy loam is don't break them, because they're not very strong. Don't rub them together. Don't do the vertical tillage. Don't break them, okay? These are not going to hold up very well because there's just not enough particles in the clay, though. But you can do it. So what builds aggregates? Biology. Biology builds aggregates. The biggest thing is don't break them. But biology, root growth. So what do you do as a farmer to manage aggregates? You plant crops. The better crops that you grow, the better they do, the better your aggregates become. There's a lot of microorganisms in there. There's a lot of interactions. I don't need to know that. I honestly don't need to know that. I'm interested in it, but I don't need to know who they are, what they're doing, where they're at. They're there. Build it and they will come. Give them a food source and an environment, they're fine. I don't need to know which ones they are. I'm not carried about. I don't care about it. This is one that really surprises people. When you add your aggregates or your clump of soil to water, it dissipates when you have low aggregate structure. And this is just very much like silting of your culverts. It plugs all the holes. The same thing happens here, it just goes vertically now. When your aggregates dissolve and come apart, those sand, silt, and clay particles plug all of the pore spaces and all the holes in there and fill them up just like the culverts fill up in a spring wash. When you have good structure, those particles in those holes stay, and that's how the water moves through them. This is one of the things that people use tillage for. And it can work. It can be very effective if it's done right. Here's some alternatives to tillage. Fall burn down is critical, especially when you're talking about weeds. Jeff did a great job of talking about that. Be ahead of it. Know what you're going after. Your crop rotation does a lot. And crop rotation is not just different herbicides, folks. I'm going to argue that we don't even really use different herbicides. Dicamba has been in small grains for decades. We have dicamba in corn forever. And now we put dicamba in soybeans. Is that really rotating your herbicides? What about 2,4-D? Is that any different? We've used glyphosate in wheat for burn downs and for pre-harvest for years. We've used these herbicides over and over and over again. We're not really rotating herbicides when we put a different crop in there. So what are we doing? We're changing the system. There's a different planting date. There's a different canopy time. There's a different harvest time. That, to me, is more important for the weed control and changing the biology for that weed than the herbicides that are in that. Cover crops are one way to use different crops to change your harvest time, your planting time, and your canopy time. And canopy is critically important. The mulch, I'll show you a few pictures. Briese, always spray small. Don't spray big weeds. This is not 4 inches tall. It's not. Okay? Just understand that. You guys have tape measures. You know how 4 inches tall is. Okay? A beer can is actually taller than 4 inches. It is. Oh, by the way, when mares tell you, turn the beer can sideways. Just so you know. And cover crops are very useful. This is kochia on March 26th in North Dakota. It is basically frost tolerant. I have another picture, I didn't put it in here, where I scoop it up with my gloves to the frost layer and it's holding the soil together. It's good for erosion. Here's my mare's tail. Hee-haw. There's a dandelion in there too, jerk. Here's this planting green thing, right? We planted green, we planted soybeans right into this. We sprayed it off like it didn't even exist. Use the same burn down, same same thing. Rolled it the next day. So you planted it, sprayed it, and rolled it all within 3 days. Good weather, it worked great. Anybody have trees or gardens? Strawberries? Mulch works really good. Lasts a lot longer than most of our herbicides, honestly. A lot longer. I like residue. It reduces wind, it reduces water erosion, reduces the particles leaving the field, keeps the fertilizer in the field, suppresses weeds. It's a pain to cut through. That's the negative. I think we can figure that out. Here's that same CRI field, middle of summer. I told you my rows don't necessarily close. I wasn't joking. This is the end of June. I need that weed control. Is that stripper header later on? These are cover crops in the end. How's the mare's tail going to compete in this? It doesn't have a chance. It might be in there, but it's going to be really small and really little. This is another, but I can't get my fertilizer on. Well, we've been broadcasting for 20-some years. The plants don't really care. The corn doesn't care. We've been putting it out there. One of the things we did learn, with our scientists who've done this in NDSU, was tested doing vertical tillage after broadcast urea, and they actually found it doesn't cover the granule enough to keep it from volatilizing. You guys heard this? There's a urease enzyme in the residue that helps break down your nitrogen and cause it to gas off. Now you have this granule sitting on top of the soil, and you tickle it with your vertical tillage, and you kind of cover it, or even cover it really shallowly. You just covered it in all the urease enzyme that you could around the surface area, and you didn't cover it enough to keep the gas from happening. That urea needs to be 3 inches or deeper to keep it from gassing out of the soil. You're not going to do that with a vertical tillage machine. You actually increase your losses by doing vertical tillage after broadcast urea. That's what we found in our soils. So we're recommending nitrogen stabilizers and don't use the vertical tillage. It works. Buys you time. You need a rain, you're going to need a rain anyway. Doesn't rain, doesn't matter. Starter pea, we're using a lot of that in our neighborhood. I don't know if it works for you or not. We have cold soils. We're cold when we're planting. It doesn't necessarily warm up right away. Our crops struggle. We tend to have high pHs. So we're putting a little bit of pea in a band on the starter. Makes a huge difference. We do get pea stratification. You can do a soil test on these fields. You will find lots of phosphorus in the top 2 inches. You'll find a little bit of phosphorus in the 2 to 6 inches, and you'll find hardly any phosphorus after 6 inches. That's why we don't test deeper than 6 inches for phosphorus is one reason. The other reason, it doesn't matter because most of your roots are in the top 6 inches. That's where they are. Why do we do 2 by 2? Take a look at that root. Tell me why we do 2 by 2. Do corn roots go straight down? Not at all. Not at all. Do you want your phosphorus 6 inches below your corn seed? When's it going to get there? This is at the end of the season. I want a 2x2. That's where I want it. Or I want it on the surface because there's way more roots there. So this is what I have for you, folks. You're going to start no-tilling. You're going to encourage your neighbor to no-till. These are the things you need to start with. Residue management is my number A1. Yeehaw, make sure you're doing that. Get it back to the full width or leave it standing. Manage your water. There's other ways to manage water than evaporation. Evaporation may not be the right thing. I'm going to say cover crops go a long way to managing water, and then they're also helping you build soil structure by root growth and keeping the biology going and doing what the biology does. Keep your equipment in top shape. That's probably the best thing. Those guys that can run a planter in any no-till system know how to set their planter, their drill. They know how to do it, and they're constantly checking it. I've worked with conventional till guys that'll check it once a week for depth and then go. My no-till guys checking it 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 times in a day. Constantly checking it because the conditions change. The residue changes. As that residue dries out, he may not need as much down pressure anymore. When it's wet, he may need more. He's often constantly changing. Another pet peeve I have for when you're checking your planter, especially you high-speed guys, don't go to the end of the field, turn around, stop, and then go check next to you. Because what did you do right before you stopped? You slowed down. So that's what you're looking at, is you slowed down. And I know we all hate that little skip when you got out in the field where you lift the planter, and I know we hate that, and it's not a good thing for weed control. But if you want to know your depth, check it at the speed you were planting in the majority of the field. Don't check it at the end, and don't check it at headlands. The other thing about headlands tend to be harder, right? You might need way too much down pressure on your headland in order to get that right depth. I see people set it wrong all the time. Take a walk, even 200 yards. Plan at the end, but walk out in the field and check it out there. Then see what you're actually doing. It takes time. I'm going to say it takes 3 years to build enough structure to give you this. Minimum, if you're not screwing it up, or weather's not screwing it up. If it is, I'm thinking 5 years. And I've seen it take as much as 7, 8, or 9 years on low clay soils, very sandy soils. And some soils you're not going to build very good aggregates. Play with it and see what you can figure out. Now, since I figured on this happening, that there would be no questions anymore, and I got way too many stickers. By the way, if I bring home a whole roll of stickers, my wife is not going to be thrilled with me. I told her that these people are going to want something to remember me by with, and I spent some money on stickers. Please take them. I spent enough that I'm not going to just leave them, okay? So please take stickers. The other thing I have are yo-yos. Who wants a yo-yo? Okay, you got to come up with a good question. How are we going to do this? I have 20 hands raised. You got a question? Go ahead. First thing you better do is tillage, what you tell guys. Water management. You got wet ground, you better tile it. You're talking about water management, so I'm gonna default back to that water management thing. And tile works for you. And if that's something that works in your neighborhood area or whatever, go for it.
You have earthworms.
I have earthworms? Yes, I have earthworms. We don't have any native earthworms. Most of the earthworms that we have are brought in from Europe. Okay? So I do not have red wigglers, but I do have Aggregates, and I do have the nightcrawler, the larger ones. We mostly have the Aggregates, which are the smaller ones. They're the little pink ones, and they only go about this deep. Okay? And they do a fair amount of moving. They don't leave big channels, and like the nightcrawlers tend to use the same channels over and over and over again, so those are kind of highways, and they tend to be more stable. We do have some of them. The earthworms are there, but they're also there under tillage. It does hurt them, not as much as anhydrous hurts them, but they're there and they do come back. But what the earthworms want is food and residue. So when you give them food and residue, they're there. So high residue situations, even in high tillage, I still see a lot of earthworms. I don't know that they're the greatest indicator. I'm going to go back to the Lego blocks. Your actual structure is the best indicator.
They live in sand.
Do earthworms live in sand? They don't like it as much because it does scar their sides and stuff. They don't like it as much, but I do have seen some in different sands. But it depends on how much sand. If you're talking sand hills in Nebraska, no, they're not going to work there. It's too sandy. Something 20, 30% sand, I think they'll be okay. I don't know how am I going to do this yo-yo thing. What's the idea? Who's going to get the yo-yo? How are we going to do this? How are we going to do it? Toss them? Should I do it over my shoulder kind of thing? We are in a church, by the way. All right, I saw a bunch of hands over here. I'm going to throw one this way and I'm going to throw one that way. Unless you guys really have objections. Was that a computer I just broke? Good Lord, it better not be. Oh, hey, way in the back. Be ready to duck. Oh, it flew to the side. Okay, those are the good ones. I actually have a bag of yo-yos that have my face on them. Please take these as well. And I'm going to set them over here. Grab them on the way out. How much time I got left? How about a what? A mole plow. Yeah, I've heard of those. That's kind of a Dutch thing with a mole where they actually drag this through with a very thin shank and they leave a hole through it and they try to smear the clay around it for drainage. Okay, so where I am, we are in vertisols. They're very mobile types of soils. So we have shrink swelling clays. You saw the cracks in my ground. This is very common. They go very deep. As a matter of fact, in the fall, you don't want to drop your pair of pliers. They will be gone. It's not worth the digging to go after them. You just go buy another pair of pliers. So we can have cracks this wide that go this deep. And the moles won't work for us because we cannot stave those spaces in there. I don't know. They do work in other places. That's beyond my pay grade. I'm too far from home to know. You smear it, and that keeps the water from going in anyway. And this goes back to this water movement thing. When you have a soil of a certain consistency, and let's say you have a clay over top of a sand, the clay actually holds the water better than the sand will pull it. So the clay fills up completely. I would think the same thing would happen, because on the inside of that mole, there's no water to pull it, there's no force to pull it, and you actually have matrix potential holding it back. Okay, so you asked me how did I get all those corn residue on my soils that lasted that long. My soils are frozen for 4 months out of the year, and I get half as much rainfall as you get. I think that is part of the answer. We do see that break down fairly rapidly as well, but not to that level. And that was the following year of corn. My corn didn't hit the soil until after the soybeans were planted. It was standing. So it only had time to break down from planting to that picture about 3 months. It was in the back.
You had a picture with good dry rock and a nice cover crop, and then you said you're going to roll it. Why?
Roll it, because of rocks. We have rocks this size, combine killers, and they don't stay down. That's why we do the rolling. We're not doing the crimper rolling, we're actually doing flat rolling. To push the rock down in the soil just enough so that it doesn't go in the header. Because a rock this size will kill a $250,000 combine in 20 seconds, and it's a horrific sound because you try to shut it off and it while the pieces are flying out the back.
You guys have got
Rollers, 60-foot flat roller, like you would see a steamroller on the road. It's not that heavy, but it just takes the highs out of it. That's what that's the roller I'm talking about. If it was already dead, he wouldn't need a crimper roller at all. Yeah. You had a question. How about putting the fertilizer on both sides of the seed? Versus one, I don't know that there would be a difference. I don't know. I would expect not. Because it just needs enough to get going. And we've never done it on both sides. One of the issues with that 2-inch band is it's another piece of equipment just off to the side, and we got to cut again. And you're tripling my problem instead of doubling it. I'd be a little nervous about it. I'm not saying it wouldn't. I don't think it would give you enough advantage to pay for the heartache. But I could be wrong. Getting questions from this side of the room. Yes.
They've been no-tillers for like 35 years, okay? They're in Southwest Michigan. They said it takes like 5 to 6 years to get your soil condition. I had a compactor probe I put down, just walking out to the center pivot was. I went to center pivot track, I only went out about 8, 10 inches. Put it on the track, I went down like 30 inches. What their corn yields are, it's 240.
So the neighbor in Michigan, long-term no-till, told you it takes 5 to 7 years. You went into your pivot with a compaction probe, and you found differences in 2 years? Yeah, I'm not surprised. Corn has a massive root system. Incredible amount of roots. Almost all of our grasses do, but corn even more so, right? So corn has these large nodal roots that are mostly for just water. And it has finer roots too, but your cereal grains have mostly finer roots. But these big worm-sized holes of that corn, it can be incredible. Like, to me, if you want to build structure, you need grass roots. You need that branching root. Tap roots are fine, but they're not going to build that much structure. Again, this is like, things are different. Details matter, where you're at, what you're doing. Pay attention to it. Use a shovel if you're going to assess your soil. Use a shovel. Back. What percent clay? Where? What percentage of clay in our soils? Everywhere from 70% clay to 10% clay within the same field. That's all. So there's not a whole lot of 70 in that field that I'm talking about, but really this is a highly eroded field, so we've actually lost most of the clay on the surface. We gained a little bit on the side hill and put it all in the low spot. That's where it's at. And the way that our soils form with the glacial till, it just kind of come in and fell off the glacier, so we have this wide variability. It's not uncommon for me to have 20, 30 soil types in a quarter. It's very common. They just call them complexes because they're tired of describing them. They can't accurately separate them, no. They're too close together.
So you're not from Imperial, North Dakota?
Imperial, North Dakota. I haven't heard of that one. Oh, yeah, no. Sugar bee babies? No. In the back. Thoughts about rates and timing on nitrogen for the no-till systems? I am against fall nitrogen, period, bar none. Don't care. My soils are frozen. I still don't care. I'm against fall nitrogen. I have growers that do it and make it work. I'm still against it. I think it's poor management, period. For corn, I'm hedging my bets. Now, our fertility scientists would tell us 50-50, 50% pre-plant, 50% side dress. That's what you should be doing. I'm hedging my bets because I know my growers are busy. They got a lot of things to do, and there's a lot on their plate. I go 70-30 is my recommendation. I want 70 up front, 30% behind. Here is why. We can have poor stands, we can have poor emergence, we can have bad flooding, we can have issues with our corn stand. Then we can skip the second pass 30%. If we have poor stands and we only put 50% on, we don't have enough nitrogen to make it work. So we have to do a side dress. The other thing is that if we have really good stands and a really good year, and boy, this year's going to rock, we can juice that 30% up to 40%, and we can push that yield a little bit at the right time. Those are my recommendations. No, they haven't been calibrated for us. The PSNT test has not been well calibrated for our soils. And so it doesn't give me a lot of information. It really doesn't. Our fall soil test is very descriptive of the nitrogen that we have because our soils freeze. So the water kind of stays there. And when they come out, they thaw like this. So it doesn't really leach a whole lot. Now, we can have leaching in season. We're not doing a whole lot of it. It's not calibrated for us. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with it. If it works, I'm sure it works in other places. Like, use that test. That's fine. It isn't calibrated well for us. And I want to do variable rate nitrogen too. This whole flat rate thing I think is ridiculous. What kind of organic matter do we have? Percentages. Okay, so my organic matter tends to run from about 2.5, up to 6. Anybody, odd? Is that a good? Yeah, I like 6 too. Like, it's good. Getting there takes forever. What kind of nitrogen release do we get? I have no idea. I don't have a clue. I'm not sure that anybody else knows, because that's, again, a biological process. Here's what I tell my growers. We can get 170, 180, maybe 200 bushel corn. Like, that's kind of topping it out. That's an awesome year for us, okay? We're fertilizing for right around 150, okay? That's what we're shooting for. That's what we're putting nitrogen on for, and I'm split applying it, 70-30. And if we really think we got a bumper, we're going to push a little bit, give her another 10, 15 pounds, okay? If it's a really good year for corn, that means we had good moisture, warm temperatures. That's a really good year for your microbes, for your mineralization. And we've done very, very well by banking on them as bonus fertility. And we've gotten really, really good yields like that. The other thing is that your really, really good spots have better organic matter and better release. So we don't juice the good spots. We manage those differently. But again, this is 1,000 miles from home. Keep that in mind. But I don't want to see 180 pounds, more than 180 pounds of nitrogen on any cornfield in North Dakota, period. It happens. I don't think it needs to happen, period. That's my opinion. And I don't have data to back it up. How much nitrogen do we get from our cover crop? Not as much as I want. I'm really disappointed in this. So we thought we were doing this catch and release thing in North Dakota. We thought we were putting the cover crop on, it's catching all this nitrogen from before, and it kicks it out next year magically to my corn crop, and everybody's happy, healthy, running through the fields like puppies and rainbows. The data is showing us that is not happening. Very good fertility scientists in North Dakota, 3-year study, 17 sites. It takes 30 pounds more nitrogen when we've had a cover crop. That's the data. Even if we had what? Yes, even if we've got the legumes in there. And what our fertility scientist, and I hate what he had to say because I think there's something to it. I don't know what it is. It's not showing up. His data is solid. I can't argue with the guy, but I still think there's something else to this systems approach, especially when you get 10, 15 years in. I don't think we need as much nitrogen to get that 175 bushel corn. I can't prove it. But, so, it's part of the carbon nitrogen cycling breakdown. It has to do with weather, temperature, all those things. Also, the nitrogen is not necessarily in nitrate or ammonia form. It's in some other form. It's probably part of an organic molecule, probably part of a protein. We're maybe not picking it up. The data shows that the corn plant's not picking it up either. And so we get a benefit. We're giving a crop rotation response. Like we had soybeans the year before, we give a credit of 30 pounds of nitrogen. Or field peas or dry beans or other legumes, we give that credit. If we've had a grass cover crop, we're taking that credit out. If we've had a mixed species with a legume and a grass, we're taking that credit out. But however, my 15-year soil health, no-till cover crop systems, our corn utilization is right around 0.7 pounds per bushel. Conventional guys are right at 1. So we're backing off the fertility. Probably not a wise thing to do, but it's working so far.
Have you guys used a Haney test on some of your
Have used the Haney test, several Haney tests, and I can't make sense of it. I can't make sense of it. Like, so here's the thing. When I'm soil testing a field, I can skew the numbers. You tell me what you want, I'll give it to you. Right? I can go to the hot spots. I can go to the poor spots. I can skew that test every day long because it's predictable. I can do that with a stock nitrate test. I can do that with a tissue sample. I can skew the results whatever direction you want them to. Don't tell NRCS. Okay, so with the Haney test, I have not been able to do that. I'm a soil scientist by training. I've done laboratory methods. I understand the scientific method. I can't skew the Haney test. It's not repeatable in my geography. It may work other places, not saying it won't. I can't skew it. I don't trust it. That's what I'm going to say. I don't make decisions off of it. Why are we still at 20% if no-till is so awesome? Argentina's at 90. Why are we at 20%? That is a human problem. That is a people problem. And here's what I'm going to say. I have changed my communication methods. I've tried to be a little bit softer. I used to be the guy there was one way, my way or the highway. I used to be the guy, you're stupid if you're not doing this. Turns out people don't like to hear that. Unless they agree with you. If they agree with you, then you're great. And if only 20 people agree with you, 20% of 100 people agree with you, you don't end up in Ohio. Okay, so I understand this, and I've started looking at myself. I have run Arctic Cat 4-wheelers for 23 years. I've bought Ford pickups for 23 years. Now, if you're a red man or a green man, you are a red man or a green man to your underwear. There are some people that don't care. But if it's important to you, you stick with it. Right? This is true. This is true in everything. This is true for every human being. It's as true for me as it's true for you as your neighbor who just does not think no-till works. One of the reasons for this is that this is a year that they're going to try no-till, right? They're too wet. They didn't get things worked last fall. They're going to try no-till. They don't have any soil structure. They don't have the Lego blocks. They don't have any of that stuff. And they go out and do it, and does it work? No, it doesn't work. It takes time to learn a new trick. You got to build your skills. You got to build your soils at the same time. Okay, it doesn't work. Do you have enough money to do that? Are you willing to tolerate the time and effort when the yo-yo dies at the end of the string and you're standing here rolling this dumb thing up like, I don't need to do this. I don't need to do this. This sucks. I do it, and you do it. Why doesn't your neighbor do it? Because it's hard. Let's be compassionate. Let's understand. We all have different risk assessment, risk aversion, different things we're comfortable with. Some people play the stock market. Some people are farmers. You guys are, But it's hard to make a decision. We can talk about marketing too, ooh, right? When you know you should push the button to sell and you don't because you just might get a little more. And you sell for a lot less than you should have. Now, maybe that's only one guy in the room. That's great. But it happens. Okay? That happens. So why? When all the data shows, when all the marketing experts tell you that you should have a better plan, why don't you? Because we're human. We're people. And if somebody comes to you with compassion and listens and cares, you're much more likely to talk to them, ask them questions. My goal is, as ugly as I look, is to be somebody with compassion who will answer questions, who will take the time and say and listen. Just because I don't necessarily know how it worked for you or didn't work for you doesn't mean it didn't. I've been in agriculture long enough that my predictions can be wrong all the time. That's the way it goes. I think it's a people problem, sir. And I think we need to be compassionate and understanding of our neighbors. And I think this goes back to the science I talked about this morning, that good scientists with good information will change their mind. Maybe your neighbor will. I've seen that. I've seen that with growers that I've worked for 10 years. I've been talking about no-till the whole time. Finally, year 8, well, we're thinking about just kind of direct seeding. Cool. Here's what I think you should try. Not, well, it's about time. Different ways to phrase that. I probably went over time. 5 minutes yet. Cool. Don't forget to steal my yo-yos and my stickers especially. When am I suggesting broadcasting phosphorus and potassium? That is a question I probably shouldn't answer standing in Ohio. What I'm doing in North Dakota what I'm doing, we don't have manure or very little manure to deal with in North Dakota. We are doing a fair amount of our P and K in the fall. We're doing that variable rate because I've actually found that my P and K numbers vary more than my nitrogen numbers by far. Especially with those soils I told you, with the soybeans don't grow or the corn doesn't grow, guess what? The P numbers are on there. They're stupid high because nothing takes it out. Okay, so shut it off. We do a lot of zeros in those places and we save a lot of money. We put it where we want it to be. My soils freeze. And if I can keep my soil in the field, then it's a different situation. You can definitely broadcast it. What we've gone to is broadcasting ahead of corn for 2 years. We're not broadcasting ahead of the soybeans. We're estimating crop removal. We're watching our soil tests to make sure we're not doing anything stupid one way or the other. If we get a good deal on phosphorus, we probably throw a little bit more and skip a year. We're trying to manage that expense. That's $750 or $850 to run the floater. We're trying to manage that expense. But my phosphorus sticks just behind you. Thoughts on strip till and incorporated fertilizer? Works? Strip till machines are incredibly expensive. I think a strip till has an advantage in managing water. That evaporation thing, I think it has an advantage in managing water. I think for as far as strip till, placing your fertilizer at 6 inches below your corn seed, that's not where I want my fertilizer. I literally don't want my pea down there. That's not where the corn roots are. Very few of them. So I don't necessarily want it there. I want my fertilizer in the top 2 to 4 inches. And I want it close to the seed, my pea especially, close to the seed. That's where I want it. I don't care how you do that. If you're doing it with a strip till machine, that's fine. What we've seen is that strip till is a good way to manage water for guys that just can't get their water managed so that they can plant in those spots. We've also seen strip till be pretty negative if you get off that strip. It's really negative. I'd rather have no till every time. So it takes some different management. And the equipment is fairly expensive, but I'm not anti-strip till. If it works for you, it helps you reduce your erosion, helps you manage your soils, it helps you manage your water, by all means do it. That's a gain. I'm good with that. So I think there's lots of ways to do it. Really wishy-washy answer, but it's the truth. There's no one way.